You give somebody a plate with a steak, some kale, and some blueberries, and ask, where are your vitamins? They're going to point to the blueberries or the kale. And it's really the steak. And nobody seems to know this.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena and my guest today is Craig Emmerich, and I'm excited about this one. Craig is a best-selling author who has spent the last 20 years researching nutrition and has helped thousands of people get healthy and lose weight through a ketogenic diet. So let's start with your story, Craig. I think your story is really remarkable, how you got into this space and decided to start helping people, and all the healing that you have done.
Yeah. So, it started, I'm actually an electrical engineer by trade, by training. And what happened was met my wife, Maria, and she had some health issues when I met her. And I think your podcast has gone out with her recently. She told her story, how she was able to heal her own PCOS and health issues with diet. And it took her a while to come around to find the things that would work for her, but she eventually came to this basically ketogenic lifestyle, and she's been eating that way for over 20 years now because it helped her with a lot of health issues. Myself at the time, I didn't have any health issues. And so, I'm German background and I like to brew my own beer and do, my own thing. And took me, 5 years to really fully come around to eating the way she was. And it was mostly just because I would eat what she made me during the week and I felt great. And then on the weekends, I would eat whatever and I'd feel like crap. And I just wanted to feel good all the time. Right. And so that's when I came around, 15, 16, 17 years ago, somewhere around there. And I've eaten that way ever since, never deviate. I never have any desire to eat bread or, sugar or any of that kind of stuff. But then about 8, 9 years ago, I actually developed my own pain in my back. I thought it was related to an old football injury, but it kept going up my back and my shoulders, neck, and getting worse. And, took me probably 6 years to get it officially diagnosed as Lyme disease. And it was kind of hard I kept getting worse and worse during that time. So I spent the last, 4 or 5 years treating that. And Carnivore really did help me manage my pain and control my pain, but it didn't heal the Lyme. It didn't fix the infection. And what happened was, because I had gone so long before being properly diagnosed with Lyme, I developed CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and that led to when your immune system's on this always fight mode, it starts attacking good cells. And that's an autoimmune reaction when you start attacking your own good cells. And I had got ankylosing spondylitis is what ended up happening to me, the autoimmune disorder. And again, Carnivore does help with the pain, but it's not going to cure it or fix it.
So many people think that Carnivore is the cure for everything, but I get that it's not, and that sometimes just carnivoring harder doesn't really work.
Exactly. I was on with Judy Cho recently, and we talked about this, that, yes, we're the first to say it. I mean, we have a page of client success stories that is just crazy. All the successes we've seen with clients over 20 years of doing this, you name it, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, obviously, but all these conditions where people see huge improvements with this lifestyle. But there are cases where it just doesn't completely resolve it. In my case, I have been eating keto for, 17 years. And so I have been eating keto during this whole time, and it didn't stop me from getting Lyme. It didn't stop me from getting CIRS. It definitely helped manage the pain, which was kind of a blessing and the curse at the time, because I probably wouldn't have let it go 6 years or more. I let the pain go. If I was eating a standard American diet, it probably would have been a year or two. I'm like, this is too much. I can't take it. I think eating keto may help me manage it longer than I probably should have, and let it go longer than I probably should have. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse in that way. But yeah, it's not a cure-all for everything. That's for sure.
Since you're so good with the science part of all of this, let's talk about the availability of the nutrients, the bioavailability of the nutrients in meat versus the availability of the nutrients that are in the vegetables that we all talk about are superfoods, and you should eat a lot of them for all of their nutrients. Let's talk about the difference there.
Yeah, I've been full-time with nutrition and learning nutrition and educating myself on it for 12 or so years now. I left engineering and came to this full-time. And about 7 years ago, I want to say it was, when we started writing our book, Keto, the Complete Guide, I started looking into vitamins and minerals in meat and nutrients in animal proteins. And I was shocked that I didn't know this. I was shocked that at that stage, I didn't know how much vitamins and minerals there are just in a steak. You give somebody a plate with a steak, some kale, and some blueberries and ask, where are your vitamins? They're going to point to the blueberries or the kale. And it's really the steak. And nobody seems to know this. And I was like frustrated by it. So we put a whole chapter in our book, Keto, 6-7 years ago, with all the different charts about vitamins and minerals in meat and showing people where they're getting their vitamins and minerals. And then we expanded on that in our couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago in our Carnivore cookbook with some more charts. And then the other side of it, which is the negative side, which is the anti-nutrients and all the bad compounds that come in plants and how that can negatively affect you. And yet in animal proteins, they're in the most bioavailable forms and you get more of them. They're more nutrient dense foods all around with the animal proteins. And so for myself, I think that with carnivore, one of the reasons that helps my pain is because when you've got this load on you're chronically inflamed with SIRS, with Lyme, with your immune system is going crazy constantly. Adding another load to that to detox all the anti-nutrients and things, I think just adds an extra inflammation load that the body can't handle, and that's why my pain goes up if I get too much plant in my diet. And I think that's one of the reasons carnivore works well for controlling that pain.
So what about the difference between plant protein and animal protein for all of those plant-based proponents who think they can get all of their protein from vegetables and fruits and things like that? What's the difference between the two proteins, and why is animal protein better?
Yeah, so I think there's a vegan chart out there that shows like so many calories of broccoli gives you so much protein, and beef gives you less protein or something for the same calories. It's first of all, it's completely wrong. It's way off. And if you include the bioavailability of the protein in that broccoli, the problem is it's like 0.4 on like a absorbability chart compared to beef is like 0.9, which means you need twice as many grams of protein from that broccoli to equal the grams of protein from the beef, because not all amino acids are equal, right? You need a complete spectrum or profile of amino acids, especially ones like leucine, to trigger building muscle. And that's what we want to eat protein for, is we want to build and maintain our muscle. We want skin, hair, all the things that goes into even our bones. Our bones have a lot of protein in them. And so that's what counts, is to be able to use that protein and build muscle and build lean mass from it. And to do that, you need twice as much. So I did a chart. It's like a full head of broccoli, not just a floret, a full head. You have to do 9 of those to get the same bioavailable protein as like a 6-ounce sirloin steak. So, 9 whole heads of cauliflower. Are you going to eat that? I mean, in reality, if you're not doing like protein shakes, you're probably not getting enough complete protein on a vegan style of diet.
And that's what I love about the carnivore diet is so many people say to me, oh, where are all of your nutrients and what kind of supplements do you take? And the truth is I only take vitamin D because I just am always low in my vitamin D. That's the only supplement that I take, except I do use electrolytes sometimes, depending on water and how much I work out and what the weather's like outside if it's really warm. And people will give me a hard time about that, about how I must be taking supplements. But the carnivore diet, you don't need supplements typically, but a vegan who's trying to meet all of their needs absolutely has to supplement, or they wouldn't be able to survive. And so that's one of the points that I think is so great to make about the carnivore diet, or a very low carb, clean keto diet, is that we don't need to supplement, which means this is probably the way we're supposed to eat.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm in the same boat that I think you can get everything you need from with some exceptions. So there are some things like, for example, magnesium. Like 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. And the big reason for that is we used to get it from our water supply, a lot of magnesium in your mineral, your spring water that our ancestors drank. Now everything's filtered, city water filtered, all of those nutrients are filtered right out. And so most people are deficient in magnesium. I think pretty much everybody can benefit from adding some magnesium in a supplement. Because the other thing too is even in plant matter, which the plant matter is then consumed by the cow and upregulated the protein and the nutrients. But even in the plant matter, there's studies that have shown in the last 50 years, the vitamins and minerals in plants has gone down by like 40 to 50%. Some plants like 60, 70% less vitamins and minerals because we're depleting the soil with these row crops and these type of things, right? And so, the animals are then eating that, so that maybe they're getting a little less, but obviously a lot, not nearly as bad as the plants themselves. And so that all factors into it too. And the other thing I would add as a caveat is that if you have a chronic disease and maybe you've been deficient for a long time, supplements can help top you up or get through some of the symptoms. And then from there on out, maybe the diet is fine. But in some cases, some supplementation can help with disease in the early stages.
Yeah, and a lot of times just adding in some organs can really help because they have so many of the vitamins and nutrients that we need, and most people shy away from the organs also.
Yeah, I mean, beef liver is probably the most nutrient dense thing you can put in your mouth, like on the planet. It's off the charts in vitamins and minerals.
So what about ketosis? I know that I feel a lot better when I eat really high fat and I'm a little bit deeper into ketosis than even normal. I find that I feel a lot better. I have more energy. I sleep better at night. I weigh less. Like I just feel really good with that. Why is that? What is it about ketosis that makes us feel so good? And why should people strive for that sometimes?
Yeah, it depends a lot on situation, goals, those kind of things. As far as whether you should strive for that or not. And what I mean by that is, some of that can be counter to goals like weight loss. And, if you have cognitive issues, if you have Alzheimer's, if you have, dementia, if you've got seizures, there's definitely reasons you want to make sure your blood ketones are higher. Okay. And those are situations and conditions where you do. If you're trying to lose weight, sometimes that can be counter to that goal, because if you add lots of fat to the diet, that's going to slow your weight loss because the fat has to go somewhere. And the fat you eat goes into the bloodstream. And once it's in the bloodstream, it's either going to be burned as fuel, which means you're not burning your own fat as fuel, or stored in your fat cells, which is where majority of it goes. And so if you're trying to shrink your fat cells, adding lots of fat to the diet is kind of going to slow down that goal, right? Where moderating the fat a bit will help that goal. You may not get extra high level of blood ketones in that case. But if weight loss is the goal, that's kind of the way you want to go, because it's going to work better for shrinking those fat cells and losing weight. And the one important factor on that too is if you're metabolically damaged, if you've got diabetes, insulin resistance, the primary cause of insulin resistance is that your fat cells get stuffed and inflamed, and they reject insulin. They don't let any more insulin in or any more fat in, because they get too much fat, they're going to explode, right? It can only fit so much fat. So they reject insulin and stop fat from going in. Well, that's okay if one or just a few of your fat cells are in that state. But if a lot of your fat cells are in this stuffed, overinflamed state, now your body can't put fat anywhere. It's struggling. It can't put it in the fat cells because they're all rejecting it, saying I'm full. And so it accumulates in your liver, accumulates in your pancreas, and you're now diabetic. You're type 2 diabetic. Well, that can happen if you're 105 pounds. We've had 105-pound type 2 diabetics. Why? Because they have something called a very low personal fat threshold. When you're young, you create new fat cells. When you get past toddler age, most people do not create a lot of new fat cells. They'll regenerate old ones through autophagy. They'll break them down and make new ones, but they won't like make a bunch of new fat cells to store a bunch more fat. So you get to the state where you've got so many fat cells, if they all get stuffed and inflamed, you're type 2 diabetic. But if you only have a few fat cells, that can happen when you're 110 pounds. You can run out of fat storage when you're 110 pounds. And that's why there are 110 pound type 2 diabetics, right? And then there's other people that are 100 pounds overweight and their A1C is fine, their blood glucose is fine, because they have a lot of fat cells. And so all their fat cells aren't stuffed and inflamed. And so they're not technically insulin resistant yet until they all get stuffed, right? And so in those situations, if you're at your limit of fat storage on the body and you add a lot of fat to the diet, your triglycerides are going to go through the roof because it's going to sit in the blood while the body is struggling to figure out where to put it, right? And so in those situations, it's very important to moderate the fat in the diet to make sure you shrink the fat cells and get some of the fat out of the fat storage to reduce your insulin resistance.
So how do you usually recommend that people get into higher ketosis if that's what they want? If it's not by eating fat, do you like to recommend a lot of fasting?
Well, I guess what's the reason for getting into higher ketosis at that point? It would be my question. I mean, I've eaten ketogenic. I've eaten little to no carbs for, 17 years. And the other thing too is if you eat this way long enough, after a few years, year after year, it kind of your blood ketones will kind of go down a bit, because what are blood ketones? Blood ketones are just the amount of ketones made minus the amount of ketones used. This is what's left over in the blood, right? Just like glucose or fat. And so if you have a bunch left over in the blood, as your body gets deeper in ketosis, it's going to use them. It's going to be more efficient at using ketones. And so my blood ketones are usually like 0.5, even though I eat zero carb. And that's because, and I eat a lot of fat too. I'm in maintenance. But that's because my body's efficient at using the ketones, right? That's why a lot of times you see a spike in ketones when you first start out eating keto, because the body's not efficient at using them yet. So it's making all these ketones, but the cells aren't. You actually make more mitochondria in the cells to burn fat and ketones more efficiently. So that takes a while. And so you see a big spike in ketones when you first start keto, but then it'll usually come back down because your body gets more efficient at using those ketones. And so for me, having high blood ketones is not necessarily a goal I think anybody really needs, unless you have Alzheimer's and brain type of conditions, whether it's bipolar, Alzheimer's, seizures, those kind of things. One thing I will point out about ketones is, and this gets a little more technical as well, but in the Krebs cycle, this is where your body you're burning fuel, whether it's you're burning fat or carbohydrates in the citric acid cycle, it's called. For that carbohydrate or fat to enter that cycle, first thing it needs to be bound to is oxaloacetate. Where does oxaloacetate come from? Glucose. If you're not eating any glucose, then your body will make enough gluconeogenesis, to do it from protein, right? But if you don't eat any protein either, like when you're fasting, which is when you have your highest blood ketones, then the body runs low on oxaloacetate because you're not eating any protein to turn into glucose. You're not eating any glucose. The liver gets depleted of glucose. It's got to pull, protein off your body to make more glucose. It's starting to run out of glucose. So it runs out of oxaloacetate. So it can't burn fat directly because it's running low on oxaloacetate. So all the fat, instead of burning it directly in your cells, goes to the liver to be made into ketones. And that's why you get big, high ketones when you fast, because you run low on, you can't burn the fat directly in your cells. You're out of oxaloacetate. You're getting low on it. And that's one thing that people misunderstand too, is being keto, the vast majority of fuel being burned in your body is free fatty acids burned directly from your fat stores in the fat cells, not ketones. Some of the free fatty acids can go to the liver and be made into ketones, but most of the fat you burn is free fatty acids burned directly in your cells, if you have enough oxaloacetate.
So I wanted to also talk about metabolism with you, because at one point for me, right after I started Carnivore, I was fasting a lot and not eating very much. I was basically doing like rolling 48-hour fasts. So I was skipping a whole day of eating and then eating like 2 hamburger patties on my eating day. And I was miserable. I was depressed. I was sad. I was crying all the time. I was gaining weight. I guess my body was like in extreme starvation mode or something. So how, maybe you could explain for people how your metabolism works and why it's important to make sure that we're eating enough to be nourished, regardless of what diet we're on, how important it is, because so many women have that 1,200 calorie number in their heads, and a toddler needs that many calories, right?
Yeah, so we don't recommend extended fasting to really anyone. The only situation where it might be applicable is if somebody has cancer and you want to put the body into this total catabolic state. That's the only time. Other than that, we don't really recommend extended fasting. You just lose too much muscle. And what's muscle loss do? It lowers your BMR, basal metabolic rate, which means you burn less calories all day long, and you need to eat less calories to maintain. And so you're kind of stepping your body into this, you got to eat less and less calories to lose weight. And it becomes like I said, a pretty miserable situation. We also don't really recommend one meal a day for women. And that's because they typically can't eat enough protein in one meal to maintain their muscle. And, over time that can degrade and you lose muscle mass. And again, lower your BMR, and nobody wants to lose muscle. Especially as we get older. When we get older than 50, 60, 70, there's something called, so we talked about amino acids. Leucine is one of the most important. It's kind of like a signaling molecule to your body to say, you get about 2.5 grams of leucine. Okay, I'm going to build muscle now. But the problem is that curve shifts with age. And so the older you get, the more leucine you need to start that process of building. And so you need more protein as you age just to maintain your muscle. And that's why so many people, they actually eat less protein as they get older. And that's why the sarcopenia gets so bad as you age. And so I look at, any muscle I have now is like a down payment on future vitality. Because if I lose my muscle now, when sarcopenia, when, the leucine curve starts shifting and it's harder for me to maintain my muscle, I'm going to be in a bad place. But the more I maintain now, the better place I'm going to be when I get older. And that's why we don't recommend those kind of eating, parameters like fasting and OMAD.
And what about macros? How do you feel about macros for either like a keto or a carnivore diet for people?
I think they're appropriate if weight loss is the goal. And it may work, but you see all the time, I didn't ever track macros and I lost 50 pounds. Yeah, that's possible. There's nothing wrong with that. And that works for you. Great. We've seen a ton of people that come to us that say, I was doing how I was told to eat carnivore and I wasn't tracking anything. I was just eating the fattiest cuts until full. And all I did was gain weight, and I gained 30, 40 pounds. We see that all the time. And so the problem is, for me, I believe the biggest problem is when you're in that metabolically damaged state, you got diabetes, insulin resistance, you've likely, when you're obese, you've got leptin resistance. That means you don't register satiety as well as you should. And so it's easy to overeat, even if it's just animal meats, and animal fats, especially dairy, because you're not registering leptin like you should, because you're leptin resistant. And you have to lose some weight before that leptin resistance reduces and you start getting those satiety signals like you should. And so I think, and the other thing I would say about it too is that with macros, if it's not working, what do you do? If you're tracking macros, okay, maybe I'm not getting enough protein, or, you at least know where to go from here, right? And the other thing is to make sure you're getting enough protein. If you're tracking, if you're getting enough protein. If you're not tracking, you might be getting 50 grams of protein a day and losing muscle and not even know it. You might be satiated and all of that, and maybe even still losing weight. But, muscle loss is going to make the scale go down too, and we don't want that. So tracking will at least make sure, at least even we tell clients, even spot check, I'm going to, just today I'm going to track and see where I'm at. This is what I typically eat. What am I getting? Okay, I'm getting enough protein. I'm not overdoing the carbs or whatever. I'm good, and then go from there and adjust from there.
I ran into a friend the other day at Walmart, her and her husband, and we started talking about food, and she has been wanting to lose some weight. And so of course I, basically word vomited all over her for about 30 minutes about what I do and why it's working and, all the stuff. Told her basically all the things, that we've been talking about here today. And later on that, and I looked in their cart, and they had Salisbury steak and a bunch of diet soda, and they didn't have any real food in their carts. And after I left the store, she sent me a message and said they had put back everything in their cart, and they had bought eggs, and they had bought meat, and they had bought these all beef hot dogs. Like, she went down this whole list of things they had bought, and she said she has been taking a type 2 diabetic medication for years, like 30 years or something. And she said to me, my mom was type 2 diabetic, my dad was type 2 diabetic, my brother was type 2 diabetic, my aunt and uncle were type 2. She went down this whole list of people in her family that are type 2 diabetic. She said it runs in the family. And I said, it doesn't actually run in the family. Type 2 diabetics is not genetic, if people think that it is. So what are your thoughts on that? Because there's been a lot of talk recently about how obesity is also genetic. And so I just wanted to get your take on that, because in my opinion, neither one of those things are actually genetic. Like, it doesn't run in your genes like your hair and eye color. So using that term for it is basically making excuses and treating it like it's something like cancer or type 1 diabetes, something that really does run in the family, something that really is genetic, and it just minimizes how serious what we eat is. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so diabetes, obesity, can you have genetics that make you sort of, for example, the low personal fat threshold I talked about earlier, where you don't have a lot of fat cells, so you can become diabetic quicker, right? Because you stuff them up real quickly when you gain weight. Could that be genetic, in that if your parents had a low personal fat threshold, maybe you have a low personal fat threshold? Maybe, but that doesn't mean you have to become diabetic, right? Just like, obesity. If your parents stored a lot of body fat and got obese, does that mean you're going to store a lot of body fat and get obese? You have diabetes, or you have the genetics like they do to be able to do that, but doesn't mean you're going to do that. And the difference there is diet. If you eat a proper diet, you're going to reverse the diabetes and you're going to reverse the obesity, just like your parents could have, and just like their parents could have, if they ate the right diet. And so that's the way I look at it is, yeah, they can, genetics can kind of tip the scale. Like, okay, if you do the bad things they did, you're probably going to end up in the same situation they did. But if you change your habits and do something different, it doesn't mean you're going to end up in the same place.
Right. I agree 100%. And it's just like so many people, because I thought this too until recently, that skin cancer was genetic. And I talked to a dermatologist who said it's not actually genetic. And I know most people think that, but it's because you have the same kind of skin and hair and eye color as your parents. And you go to Florida, you go to the beach as often as them, you go to the pool as often as them. Like, it's those learned behaviors that make up these things that we're now calling genetic. And it's so important that people know the difference, and know that if you're a type 2 diabetic and if you're obese, those were learned behaviors that led you there, and you can absolutely undo that. Now, I know you guys homeschool. We homeschool too, so I applaud you for that. I love homeschooling. I wouldn't change it for anything. And this is just kind of a personal question. How do you guys balance school, life, and work? Because I know that I have a hard time with that.
Oh, it's not easy. Maria's doing a presentation this weekend in Maryland at the Antithetic conference that's going on. And her whole presentation is about kind of how to do it, in a daily life with family, and, how to meal prep, how to batch cook, how to do all these things that just make it possible to not sacrifice or compromise your diet when you have so much going on. And I don't think there's much of anyone out there that has as much going on as we do with, running our business, writing books, the clients that we have, homeschooling, going to conferences, like, it's constant, and there's no days off around here from work or any of it. But we prioritize making sure that we always have healthy food around, and like in Maria's presentation, she likes to spend maybe Sundays batch cooking. So like our protein noodle lasagna, or some of those type of recipes, she won't make one pan, she'll make 3, and she'll throw them in the freezer. Or one that's right now in the oven is a batch of ribs, big rack that Kai and I are going to share, that she smoked a couple weeks ago. And you just wrap them in tin foil, throw them in the freezer, and then you just throw them in the oven on 250 for like 2 or 3 hours. They fall off the bone and they're delicious. That's easy. I just popped it in before we started talking, and I turned the oven on, and in an hour or so, I'll go out and enjoy them. So if you plan ahead and you do some things and batch cook, you can make it a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, we do a lot of batch cooking too. When we grill hamburgers, we never grill, just like 5 or 6 hamburgers. For those of us that are home, we grill, 12 hamburgers, and we throw some all beef hot dogs on there too, and some extra beef fat. And, when we make ribs, we do the same thing. We make an entire huge rack of ribs and we eat them for the week along with the leftover burgers. Same thing when we make steak. We cover the grill with steak when we make steak. And that way we have all these foods to kind of snack on. I do think batch cooking is a great way to do it. So what does a typical day of eating look like for you at this point?
Let's see. Today I had I don't know, 7-8 ounce filet with 3 eggs for breakfast, cooked in tallow. And then I'm gonna have a rack of ribs here after we're done here, and then that's pretty much it for me. Some days I'll add in a little, like pork rinds or something if I feel like I need something in the evening. But I try to keep it pretty, strictly carnivore, not too much even spices. Like I know there's certain spicy food spices, like paprika or some of these things that can kind of cause issues with me if I get too much of it. So I try to avoid that. But with my condition, I am trying to lift weights more now with my upper body. I can't do a lot with my lower body because my hip and stuff, but my back, but my activity level is not real high. And so, I can gain, over the holidays when I start indulging a little more, I'll gain 10, 15 pounds. But then when we get to Hawaii, which we spend the winters, we're blessed to have a condo there for the winter, I'll start eating leaner cuts like fish. There's tons of wonderful fish there, and those 15 pounds will just shed right off. So it's, I just try to keep at a certain weight and just kind of manage my food intake to stay there.
If you had one piece of advice for somebody who is new to this way of eating or looking for something different because they feel like they've tried everything and nothing works, what would your one piece of advice be?
Well, first I would ask, what's your why? That's the thing. We wrote that started our whole carnivore cookbook out is, what is your why? Because it's going to change how you approach it, right? Again, if your why is, brain health or bipolar or Alzheimer's, you really want to have the fat dial up for those people to make sure they're getting enough ketones and managing it, especially in the early stages. If your why is weight loss, then I would definitely not do dairy. Dairy can be a real problem for a lot of people, especially when it comes to weight loss. So I would cut all the dairy if you're going to do carnivore lifestyle, and that'll help a lot with weight loss. But, it depends a little bit on what their why is.
So where can people find you and your cookbooks?
Well, the easiest is I created a website that links out to all our social media and everything. It's ketomaria.com. And so you can get to everything from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. This was wonderful. You have so much information. I'm so grateful that you shared it with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time here on the Carnivore Revolution.